All right, everyone. Can you hear me, Marty? All right.
Yes.
Welcome to the third and final segment of Moxa's 2023 Cybersecurity Webinar Series. Here we'll dive into latest and most advanced cybersecurity and network management solutions. And joining us today for part 3 of our cybersecurity series is Moxa's product marketing manager, Marty Wachi. Great to have you back, Marty. So just let's go ahead and go over to the next slide here for some housekeeping stuff. The webinar will run for approximately 45 minutes, depending on a couple factors. So please make some time for that in case we run a little over. We'll be sure to save some time at the end for some Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask away within that Q&A function there. And Marty will get around to answering some of them at the end of the presentation. There's also going to be a survey at the conclusion of the webinar, just a quick 2-question kind of poll survey there. And so we'd appreciate any feedback on the presentation if you have any. You'll also see the occasional poll question pop up. And so if you see that on your screen, please feel free to submit your answers at your convenience when you see them appear. And the recording will also be shared in the near future. So we'll send out an email with the link to the on-demand version, so you can kind of go through and digest again if needed. And so with that in mind, I'll go ahead and pass it off to Marty, and we'll kick off the final episode of our series here. Go ahead, Marty.
Hey guys, I'm Marty Wachi. For those of you that don't know me, I am the product marketing manager for some of the networking and cybersecurity products. I've been with Moxa for about 3.5 years now. Prior to joining Moxa, I spent more than 20 years in product marketing and product management at a lot of different networking companies. Spent 15 years with Cisco in their enterprise product management group and led several teams over the years, and probably built over 1,200 products, networking, SMB, wireless, NAS, video surveillance, most of the technologies that Moxa has on the networking side. So I have a really good networking background. So with that, maybe let's go ahead and get started here with the webinar. So just to kind of introduce like what we're going to cover kind of today, talk a little bit about understanding some of the factors that are really influencing the transformation of both the networks, but also the security around them. Some of it's internal, some of it's external, some of it's possibly what may happen. So we'll talk a little bit about that. As a result of a lot of those drivers, what we're seeing for various customers is a kind of slow move towards really a need to have more visibility. We've talked a lot about segmentation. We'll talk a little bit about that today, recap what we've covered. But a lot of that is a great foundation for security, but with a lot of how the networks are evolving and the trends, it's really just not enough for a lot of our, especially medium to larger customers. And we'll talk about some of those things that are driving them towards more visibility beyond segmentation. And then the majority of what we'll spend the time on is some of the Moxa tools that we have that's going to be able to help you with things like threat detection, visualization, and security policy management at scale to address some of these things that we're seeing, both in terms of the digitization as well as the need for increased visibility. So with that, why don't we go ahead and get started here. So we'll cover the trends of what's happening and what's kind of driving some of the security. I'll talk a little bit about, why we see the need to really go beyond segmentation, even though, again, it's a great first step, but it's nowhere the end of the destination as far as the journey is concerned. And then really talking about the management tools and other things that we have that can help you guys out. So let's start with the trends, and there's kind of a lot going on here with this slide, but this is kind of how I am visualizing things today. So I kind of put them in three like discussion buckets that we'll talk about today. The first two, digitization and a lot of these moves that we're seeing towards readiness for artificial intelligence, a lot of those have to do with increasing the surface area of attack in terms of the results of what those things are doing. The second set is artificial intelligence and some of the internal, external regulations that's also then driving the need for more visibility and security, right? So these are kind of like the three big buckets. And as the surface area of attack increases, as the number of devices are increasing, it's creating a new set of problems for all of us that you probably are already familiar with to a certain extent. So if we start with digitization, this is something that's been going on for the better part of the last decade, if not longer. And I want to kind of have a disclaimer here in the sense that digitization of a network or an OT network in particular, the problem increases with scale. So if you only have a few devices that are networked, a lot of the challenges that we may be covering today may not apply to you as much. They will apply to a certain extent, but as you go from trying to manage tens of devices to hundreds to thousands, the same way that you would manage a network and secure it for 10 devices, a lot of times doesn't work for hundreds or thousands. So as we all are moving towards digitization and connecting more and more devices, the scale is what's creating some problems for us and a lot of our customers. So that then requires us to look at new management options and capabilities, which we'll cover later. Updates and patch management become a lot more difficult because, again, you can go and manually update one or two devices for firmware updates and things like that. You might even be able to go and manually update a handful of firewalls. But the more things that you have to manually update, the more opportunity there is for human error in terms of misconfiguration by accident or just missing something entirely. Not to mention the lifecycle management of things is unfortunately becoming faster and faster. I think Felipe talked about in one of our previous sessions, kind of the idea about operational lifecycle being a little bit different from like the security lifecycle of something. A lot of the products that we make and a lot of the reasons why you chose Moxa products is because of our longevity and durability, and they can last a very, very long time in terms of their operational effectiveness. Unfortunately, from a security perspective and updates and vulnerabilities, a lot of times the security life cycle doesn't last as long as the operational life cycle. So this whole idea of life cycle management for these networks is becoming more and more important as there are more patches, there's more updates, there's increased security. Moving to the middle bucket, right? So this is probably one of those inflection points. I think it's going to be kind of like the internet. Now, obviously, we'll have to wait and see. That's a pretty bold claim. But I think if you've been reading some of the articles and attended some of the seminars that I've done, a lot of your C-suite individuals see this as a way to improve productivity, cut costs, become more not just efficient, but maybe even differentiated. One of the trade-offs for this is that in order to enable that in a lot of cases, everything has to be connected. So again, increasing that surface area of attack. And our traditional segmentation as that first step of securing the network, if everything has to be connected and everything has to talk to everything else, may not be as effective in an environment where we want to enable these networks for future or even current artificial intelligence applications. The third consideration, which I think we're going to see a lot more as this evolves, is if you think about a lot of the artificial intelligence models today, it's not something that you buy and then run on your own in your own network. A lot of these things are cloud-based. A lot of them are going to be hosted. The value that and differentiation of these AI services are really only as good as the data that you feed it. So obviously, those people that can get the most data fed into their AI models are going to have the best models. So this whole idea of company intellectual property and how do I take advantage of AI but not give them access to everything on my network, I think is going to be a new challenge that we're going to have to start to deal with in future years. And again, that straddles the fence of both increasing the surface area of attack, but then the need for increased visibility and security. The final pillar is really, or bucket, is regulations. So you'll see a lot of, at least what I've seen so far in the 3.5 years being here, is this is probably the one that drives a lot of the behavior for a lot of the customers that I talk to. So whether it's federal regulations saying that, hey, for NERC types of customers, for level 5, you have to have IDS, IPS, or Department of Homeland Security coming out and saying, hey, these transportation networks and other networks now have to have these other security capabilities. That obviously is driving a lot of it. But as we see more increased attacks, again, the segmentation piece that we've been preaching for years and years, that again is the fundamental building block for a good cybersecurity foundation, doesn't give you the visibility and threat response that some of the more advanced IDS, IPS firewalls give you. And even though it may not be something that, again, you're being asked for today, or maybe it's not even a regulation today, as you start to see more and more of these attacks coming up, and especially for public companies, the internal, I won't call them regulators, but decision makers, interested in, okay, well, what are our forensic capabilities, right? If we are a public company, we do get attacked, do we have the ability to go back and look at and say, hey, when were we compromised? And, what are some of our liability mitigations, even from like an insurance perspective, as an example? These things are going to become more impactful over time. Now, again, most of us are not protecting networks that really involve customer data. So it's much different than like Visa, let's say, trying to protect customer data. What we're really protecting a lot of times from an OT perspective is our own intellectual property for that customer, as well as just the uptime for the network, right? So being able to have these things in the future, I think is super important. So with that, let's jump into kind of a poll question before we really get started here, right? I covered some of the things that I'm seeing. I think what I'd like to see from you guys is, what some of your feedback. What do you see as driving OT cybersecurity change for your organization or customer? I listed a bunch of things that we talked about here. There may be other things that you guys are seeing that maybe I left out or missed. I'd love to get your feedback here, because this is something that changes almost on a daily basis. So if we could maybe take a moment here and see, hey, is digitization, artificial intelligence, government regulation, just increasing number of cybersecurity breaches, or other internal or external driver? Really be interested to see what you guys out there on the call are seeing. And we'll give it just another minute or so, and then Andrew, maybe you can flip up the results here once we get a good number of responses here. All right, so it looks like, kind of not surprising, we're seeing the security breaches being a big driver, digitization. I'm kind of surprised no one has seen any artificial intelligence yet, but that's something that I think we are going to see more. And then obviously internal, external drivers. All right, very good. All right, let's keep going then. All right, so let's move on to kind of the segmentation. Again, like I said, it's fundamentally the foundation for a really good cybersecurity practice, but it's really probably not enough as far as what we're starting to see from an evolution perspective. So hopefully you guys have all seen this in previous webinars that we've done, and this is just our security solutions model from Moxa. And it really is more than just the product, right? For us, it starts with the secure development piece. A lot of it's product, and we'll talk about some of that today. A lot of it's management, which is a lot of what we'll focus on. Education, like what we're doing today. And all the back end. How do you warranty the product? How do you get support? How do you address, you know, security alerts and things like that? So this is more than just product. And this is kind of our view of approaching how we approach security, so that as you're trying to choose vendors out there, you at least have an idea of kind of where we stand and what's important to us. So in the previous two webinars, we focused a lot, and Felipe spent a lot of time talking about secure by design. You guys have used a lot of our switching platforms that we talked about, which, like I said, is really the foundation for a cybersecurity practice, and having a solid defense in depth and segmentation strategy to help shrink that surface area of attack. And that's great. But again, for some of these things that we just talked about, it doesn't give you the visibility, it doesn't give you the forensics, it doesn't give you the threat response that a lot of these things that we're starting to see asked for by some of our customers, that I think you're going to have to start seeing more and integrate that into your security practices. A lot of what we covered was, you know, the 62443-4-2, and how we're doing a lot of things at the product level to secure it from a design perspective. And Felipe went through that in, I think, a lot of detail. On this slide here, talking about kind of some of the vertical security and that segmentation, and kind of how I visualize it kind of in a simplistic way, is if you look at these different colored boxes here, right, we can go and create these different segments, or if you will, little mini network islands within our infrastructure. But then as we try and digitize this, as the scale goes up from just a few devices to tens to hundreds to thousands, having all of these things managed as all these different islands really becomes unwieldy, right? And very difficult and very time consuming, let alone if you want to, again, start to be ready for AI and some of these other things where everything basically has to be connected. So that's where a lot of the network management comes into play. And as you have these connections and you're not able to rely as much on strictly segmentation, you need some of these other threat visibility and response capabilities that are in these next generation firewalls, with, you know, whitelist and blacklisting control, the worm containment, the IDS IPS for intrusion prevention and detection. We also have a function called virtual patching that we'll talk about later. But really, all this equates to having more enhanced visibility into like what's going on with your network, and being able to have those forensics, so that when you do have a breach, you then can go back and look at, okay, how can we root cause, like what happened and where it broke out and when did it happen, potentially. So with that, let's talk about like some of the tools that we have and some of the products that we have to help you navigate some of these things that we're seeing as trends and things that are happening from a security perspective. So the first place I like to start is from a security positioning perspective. Where does Moxa fit into the greater scheme of things? And this is a super important slide, because again, like I mentioned in my bio intro, I spent 15 years at Cisco. We dominated this orange space here, from a carpeted IT and pushing into the OT network. You know, Cisco's one of the biggest security networking companies on the planet, at least by revenue. They have a lot of good products, and most of your large customers are probably using them, or Fortinet or Palo Alto or somebody like that, that again is equally dominant in this orange space. Moxa and our products that I'm going to cover today from a security perspective really are not intended to replace any of those tier one carpeted IT security vendors. If there's only another couple takeaways you get from today, the second one would be Moxa's security offering is really targeted at the edge of the OT network, and is really meant to be complementary to those IT security companies that you're already using: Cisco, Checkpoint, Fortinet, Palo Alto. And what you'll see hopefully by the end of this is that what we're trying to do is protect a part of the network where, either from form factor, price, or environmental ruggedness, a lot of these other companies just don't have affordable solutions to get closer to the edge of the network. And it's not intended to replace any of those IT security systems that you already have. In fact, we are trying to support a lot of the the IT security protocols that they're already using from an OT perspective, so that the IT guys are likely managing a lot of this can use all the same tools that they're already used to. From a portfolio perspective, this is like what the cybersecurity offering from Moxa looks like. You guys have probably already seen this. We're going to focus today on really the IDS, IPS firewall devices for device security and the secure infrastructure devices here, as well as the security management piece. We've already pretty much covered the secure network access piece in previous webinars, so go to our YouTube channel and check that out if you haven't seen that already. Okay, so again, this probably doesn't apply equally to all of our customers, but again, as you're seeing that digitization, as you're seeing customers connect more and more things to the network, and as the surface area of attack is increasing, what we're seeing is definitely a move beyond device level management and visibility. Mox has done a great job of building really easy to use interfaces to be able to get on the device, not have to use command line to configure it and stuff, and we're going to continue to do that. But as you start to have 10, 20, 100 of our firewalls and managed switches on the network, it becomes a lot harder to go to each and every interface at the device level to configure policies, to try and get visibility into what the network is doing. So hence this need for management and visibility beyond the device level. If you've only got a few devices on the network, then that may be fine. But as the scale increases, problems like provisioning of devices, how do you integrate with IT becomes an issue. How do you do centralized security policies to save time and eliminate human error? How do I see what's going on the network? And then obviously the threat visibility and response to detect and respond to threats. So that's what we're going to take a look at in a little bit more detail today. So starting with the network management, those of you that have seen me talk about network management before know that I like to talk about it in terms of network lifecycle. There are things that you need to do in a network at different stages, and we have different management tools depending on what stage of that network lifecycle you're trying to do. If it's more monitoring and visibility at the local area network level, predominantly you're going to use MXView. If you're talking about initial provisioning and deployment, it's probably MXconfig or the next generation version of that tool that we're coming out with. What's kind of new for us is MX Security, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide here as we try and talk about what the differences are between the platforms. So for those of you that have been Moxa customers for a long time, you may be familiar with MXView. Last year, we moved to MXV1, which is like the next gen platform for our network management. This is where all of the site level network management and visualization tools happen. So discovery, monitoring, alerting, APIs. What's new about this and why we moved to MXV1 is we now have MXV1 Central Manager. So if you've got a lot of sites, if you're a partner that's managing multiple customers with multiple sites, it was a challenge because previously you had an MXView instance running at each customer site, but there was no way to kind of aggregate all of that. And now we can do that with MXV1, which you'll see here in just a minute. What's new for us, and if there's like a third takeaway for today, would be MX Security. This is different from network management. This is really a security policy manager. And what's unique about this from a differentiator for Moxa is that the only other companies that I've seen with something like this are those tier one IT security companies like Cisco, like Fortinet, like Palo Alto. Most of our OT firewall competitors, I don't think I've seen anything like MX Security, where you have centralized policy management, where you can take all the next generation firewalls that we have, put them in a group and apply security policy across the entire universe of those products that are deployed. So we'll get into that in just a second, but those are kind of the differences. So it's not either or, it's more and. You're more likely to need both MXV1 and MX Security to really fully take advantage of all the tools that we have available to you. So starting with MXV1, the MSRP per node starts at MSRP of $49.99. Talk to your Moxa salespeople and partners about what kind of discounts we have as you get up in quantity. But as you'll see here, it's basically intended for everybody. It's going to give you a topology, traffic view. We'll get into all of that in just a second. Some of the new things that you may not be familiar with, we now have Linux OS support. A lot of our customers that are very security conscious don't want to run Windows OS on their environment. So having a Linux option now is important. We also now have a migration tool to help you migrate from your MXView to MXV1 instance. And then we'll talk about the MXV1 Central Manager here in just a second. So when we talk about visualization, we get the topology view of the network. So this is where you get to see all the devices that are SNMP manageable or discoverable. So this is both Moxa devices, as well as you'll get some information on third-party SNMP devices and endpoints. And this gets built out automatically at the site level. Traffic view. So this gives you a view of the Moxa devices and gives you a view of what the traffic looks like on all of these links. So this is a good way to help troubleshooting if you're seeing slowness in the network. It's a great way to baseline your network so that as you're starting to see increases in traffic, you can proactively plan. It also could give you an idea at a network visibility level of maybe there's something going on with my network in terms of there's a lot of traffic that this endpoint or this segment's generating, and it could be a bad interface, it could be bad stuff on that device, but it gives you an idea of being able to see what's going on at the traffic level. One of the really cool tools that a lot of our customers like that are using Moxa is our security view. So this is only for Moxa devices. This really takes 62443-4-2 SL1 and SL2 and basically goes out, polls the device, and can tell you visually by the different colors here which products are configured for which 62443 level and if you're missing anything. So like for here, this one's only medium level. You could go in and it will tell you, okay, these are the things that you have to configure in order to bring it all the way up to green, which would be high level security. The other advantage to this is for those of you that are in environments where compliance is important, this is another good way to be able to make sure that the devices over time maintain this configuration so that, again, over time through updates and maintenance, things don't get changed. So we have a lot of customers that run this on a regular basis to make sure that their Moxa infrastructure is maintaining the same settings that they're intended to have. Lastly, we have Fiber Check, which helps you take a look at the network from a fiber perspective, allows you to get kind of into the next section, which is the traps, which tell you, hey, these are the things that you might set warning levels for because you're certain seeing, the dB drop below a certain threshold. So that gives you some advanced warning on maybe you've got a problem with the fiber run or the optics on the SFP module. The other thing that you use MXV for is notification. So again, this supports SNMP management of both Moxa and third-party devices. So any of the OIDs that you're using, you can set event traps for thresholds for us to be able to report those traps back to you and send notifications. And again, this could be Moxa or third parties as long as you have the SNMP traps for that. Backup and restore. So this is super important for things like disaster recovery plans, right? What happens if a device goes down or gets stolen or, malfunctions or something? Being able to back up and restore the configurations are super important. So this is a way for you to storehouse all of those things, as well as do a database backup of MXView itself. So that again, if there's some type of outage of a hard drive or something like that, you can restore the data very quickly. Lastly, there's the integration. So it's MXView is a web-based system. So you can actually embed our web pages into other web-based interfaces as a widget. So you could display this in another web interface. as well as MXView is used then as the kind of central API as a northbound interface to other systems. There's a lot of features that I can't really cover today, but when you get a copy of this presentation, or if you want to write this down, this is our demo site that you can go and log into for free and kind of at least look at some of the things that I just showed you. So definitely check that out. MXV1 Central Manager. So this is the way that you get like single pane of glass management for multiple MXV1 sites. So again, this MSRP starts at $300 US MSRP per site. And what it does is it allows you to consolidate all the sites. So if you were to kind of summarize it on one slide, each of these dots could be a MXV1 site running MXV1, and you can get, a really quick glance at how each of them is doing. If there's a problem, you can actually remote into one of these sites and access the MXV1 management console without the need of a separate VPN. The last three things are probably what I'd say is probably worth the price of admission. And we'll cover these here in the next couple of slides. So let me just jump right into those. So just so that you guys understand kind of the architecture, right? You're going to have MXV1 Central running in a data center or public cloud, able to get to all of your central or your MXV1 sites, whether they're Windows or Linux. So in this case, you've got 3 sites. So I'm going to need 3 MXV1 Central Manager licenses to manage those 3 sites. At each one of those sites, you have some number of nodes. And for those of you that are familiar with MXView or MXV1, we license MXV1 based on the number of management nodes you need at the site. So there's 2 licenses involved. There's a site license for each site you want to manage, and then a node license at each site for the number of nodes each site needs to manage. Now, one of the new things with Central Manager is because each site was its own database and its own instance, if you had multiple sites and you needed you had one admin for multiple sites, you'd have to go in and add them to each database separately. Now you have a hierarchical user and group system where you can assign them to different sites and even multiple sites. So if an admin leaves, it's really easy to revoke their credentials. New one comes in, it's really easy to add them to multiple credentials. In the past, you'd have to go to each and every site and maintain it separately. So this is a big time saver and helps with just making sure everybody has the right access. Finally, this is probably the feature I think is most valuable, which is, again, since each MXView instance was managed on a node license separately, if you bought like 1,000 node license for a site, but were only using 750 nodes, the other 250 that you had, you couldn't use anywhere else. Well, now with MXV1 Central Manager, all of the licenses, whether they're site licenses, add-on licenses for wireless and power, or device licenses, now are centralized. So now you can dynamically allocate them to different sites as needed, as long as you have the right amount of licenses. And you can move them around as much as you want, and there's a lot of flexibility here. So this just makes management much, much more efficient. Lastly, there's reports, and this is something that I think you're going to see us put a lot of effort in over the next couple of years to really make this a lot more robust. But this is going to give you a lot of reporting functions across all the different sites and all of the different instances of MXView1. So I know there's a lot that we just covered there, and if you have questions, I encourage you to pop them in the Q&A, and I'll try and address them at the end. But in the interest of time, I'm going to keep going. Okay, so I talked about this earlier, and I said, hey, this is probably one of our best differentiators from a security perspective. And like I said, this is really for that medium to large customer that's managing a bunch of firewalls or IDS, IPS rules. And this is a way to centralize all of that. And what it does is it basically allows you to put the different firewalls from us in groups and then apply the same policies, just like you'd set them up on the individual firewalls, but to the group. And then in one click, just deploy it all. So let me go through what some of the features here of it is. So first, you get a dashboard, just like a lot of the other things. And again, this isn't really for network topology visualization. This is more security policy stuff. So this is going to give you like activities, what's been detected, what threats have been mitigated, things like that. It's widget based, so you can add a bunch of things. If you have requests, definitely let us know. This is the group management piece, and this is what really is cool and helps us scale. And like I said, I haven't seen any of our other OT competitors have something that's even close to this. Usually you're looking at your IT tier one vendors like a Cisco or Fortinet that have a lot of policy management that's even more advanced than this. But this, I think, is a great first step for us as we continue to build on this. But like I said, you're able to put devices in groups, then apply policy to those groups, whether they be geographical, functional, or from a responsibility perspective. Then what you're able to do is from a configuration perspective, deploy different configurations at the firewall level from a policy, device, firmware, security software package. So this is the IDS IPS security package, or licenses. So the other thing that this allows you to do is, let's say you had a network of 10 EDR G9010s, but only 5 IDS IPS licenses. You can actually use this to move the IDS IPS license from one firewall to another. You just can't exceed, the number of licenses you have running at any one time. From here, this is how you build a policy. So very much like the interface that you'd see in the firewall itself, gives you a way to configure the different layer 1 through 7, and whether it's DOS or IPS. If you license that, once you define the policy, then what you're able to do is just apply it to a group and hit enter, and it gets pushed out uniformly to all the products in that group. So that's a huge time saver. Okay, so from an IDS IPS module perspective, this is something that's optional on a lot of our firewalls and ones that are coming in the future. But this gives you that application level visibility that we were talking about, that as these networks grow, as you're looking at additional visibility and threat mitigation and forensics that you need. And in our case, it's got both the intrusion prevention and detection and virtual patching. And this is kind of what the interface looks like. So when you're out there, setting this up and you're doing your initial baselining, this is where you would, go and you run the product for a month or two, look at the logs, determine, where your false positives are, do a search for those particular rules and disable them. And this would allow you to remove those false positives from the system, and then be able to allow you to implement the IPS with some peace of mind that we're not going to block critical traffic and inadvertently take something down on the network. This also gives you a bunch of event logging from a security perspective and filtering, so that you can kind of see what's going on. Again, it's not that SNMP trap, like an interface has gone down, or the packets have gone over this number. These are security types of logs. Okay, so one question that you guys are probably thinking, if you're not familiar with Moxa or maybe never heard of us before, is, well, I don't think Moxa is a security company, are you? Well, not from a software perspective. We're a OT connectivity company. So what we did about 3-4 years ago, I think it was, is we did a joint venture with a company called Trend Micro, which you've probably heard of. I use them a lot at Cisco. And basically the joint venture resulted in Moxa hardware plus Trend Micro software to create kind of some new endpoint-based security. So the IDS IPS solution that we're using in MX Security and our next generation firewalls is from Trend Micro. So they're the ones who are providing us the signature files for all of this. It's not Moxa trying to figure this out on our own. So this gives us a very reputable tier 1 security vendor that's helping us with the signature files. if you look at our security appliance portfolio today, and this is probably a separate webinar just in and of itself, this is kind of what it looks like. You've got our entry-level NAT product, which is like NAT plus basic firewall. For those of you that have been around Moxa for a long time, we have our EDR original series of 810s and 902, 903s, but they're all kind of getting old in the tooth. So we have these new next generation firewalls that are either out or coming out very shortly that are based on MXROS or Moxa routing operating system. So they all use the same operating system. They're all using the latest Linux kernels. You can see they all have future add-ons for capabilities for IDS, IPS. The network management piece you can see is both MXView1 and MX Security. So even if you're using our firewalls without the IDS, IPS module, MX Security still can allow you to manage the firewall piece. So I think that's super important as far as moving forward with these next generation firewalls that we have. Okay, so a couple of things here from an architecture perspective. So there's a couple different architectures that probably cover 80 to 90% of the different ways that we see IDS and IPS being deployed in the marketplace. So the first one is probably the most typical, and this has been around for a very, very long time. It's very popular amongst OT networks because basically there's no way you can interrupt the network, right? It basically, the detection is out of line from the network itself. What you do is you copy all the traffic from the endpoints to like an IDS IP sensor, whether it's our product or something like SCADAfence or Microsoft Azure Defender or Nozomi or somebody, you basically have a sensor that looks at all the traffic and tells you, hey, these are some bad things that are going on. And then you have to have some other way of mitigating that threat. But a lot of folks like it because it does give you some visibility and it's very unobtrusive to the network. I personally don't like it from the standpoint that it significantly impacts the QoS on your network. So as you're trying to prioritize things, it does limit some of your capability there. It does require you to have an RSPAN infrastructure to be able to copy all this traffic over the network and just doubles the traffic over the network, as well as there's no threat response in this particular use case. Now, we can support it. So if you want to deploy our device as like a sensor and use MX Security, you can do that. We also support the second scenario, which is probably the most common as far as new implementations that we're seeing, which is the next generation firewall is in line with the network. So anything that's north-south traffic between the P1 and P2 interface, we can scan and detect and see what's going on. So you see, a lot of things on the network, maybe not quite everything on the endpoints, anything that's east-west traffic, this direction that doesn't cross these interfaces, you might not see, which kind of brings us to the third option that I'll share in just a second. But this is very cost-effective to get started as far as pushing your IDS, IPS closer to the edge. And this is where, again, if you're using Cisco, Palo Alto, Fortinet, their firewall is an order of magnitude more expensive than ours. So you might not be able to drop a $30,000 or $40,000 firewall as close to the edge of your OT network as you want. But if you go back and look at the previous slides of the price of our like EDR G9010 as an example, it's very cost effective to start pushing that detection capability even closer to the edge of the network, giving you more visibility, more forensics, more threat management in a very robust, OT platform. So one of the questions that I ask a lot of customers is, especially if we're trying to figure out how do we, co-work with their existing IT infrastructure is, they'll say, hey, we already are an XYZ shop and we really like what they have. And it's like, okay, keep using them. I'm not here to tell you not to use them, but can you get detection and threat management as far out to the edge of the network as you want? And the philosophical discussion that we have is, if you could, would you want to have every critical asset on the very edge of the network be able to be protected and monitored? And generally speaking, That's kind of a motherhood and apple pie question. And everybody says, yeah, obviously we'd love to do that. It's a question of, can we afford it? And, there's probably some other questions around, can we manage it and all these other things? Does it integrate into, whatever SOC or SIEM we're using? And, that's a very lengthy discussion. But just from a cost and capability perspective, it is something that we're encouraging people to look at, especially if you're not familiar with Moxa, because this is an option a lot of our customers, our big customers, haven't seen before. And again, we're not trying to replace what you already have. We're saying use this to augment what you already have, where you can't afford to deploy a Cisco or Palo Alto this close to the edge of a critical asset. The other reason for doing this is something that a lot of the other enterprise firewall guys don't talk about or may not have the same capabilities, which is something we call virtual patching. And what we do here is what we're talking about is we have OSs that are old, both Windows and Linux, that are no longer, patchable. They're end of support, but they're running critical infrastructure applications like on a Windows 7 device that we just can't take down. Because we're working with Trend Micro and because of their heritage with enterprise desktop security, in their signature files, they have a lot of Windows and Linux OS based attack signatures. So what we're able to do is put our firewall in front of that edge device and through the network virtually patch the OS. So if it sees an attack targeted at a Windows 7 vulnerability, we can actually block it at the network level and, like we said, virtually patch the overall network. So this is something that, again, a lot of our customers that have been interested in using this, especially the edge, and partners also like this function. So I just wanted to call your attention to it. Okay, just to wrap up here real quickly, we talked a lot about at the beginning how digital transformation and other things are kind of shaping how security is changing in the OT. Thankfully for you guys, it looks like AI is not one of those drivers yet, but it's something I encourage you to keep an eye out for because it's coming. As a result of like this increased surface area of attack, having more visibility beyond segmentation is super important. And then, how does Moxa like help you guys with this? This is something that hopefully we just covered with you guys and have a better understanding of how we might be able to augment some of your other security solutions that you're already using. Again, we're not trying to displace anybody. I think for the most part, we're more complementary than anything else. So with that, I think we had one poll question that Andrew wanted to put up there, which would be, I know we covered a lot of things in this webinar. Are you interested in maybe talking to a Moxa expert on one or more of these topics, or maybe even something else? We'll give it a few minutes for you guys to answer this. And then I think we've still got a few minutes left where maybe we can answer just a couple of the questions that are in the chat. So Andrew, whenever you're ready, if we want to take a couple questions, I know we're a little bit over, but.
Sure, yeah, let's go ahead and jump into our questions here. Looks like we do have our first one here. How are the MX security licenses sold, by node, to, or as a package?
So the security licenses are at a device level. So they're sold individually, but they can be also bought as a package. So if you, let's say, bought 10 EDR G9010 routers, you can get a package of 10 and most likely get some discount with them. Or if you just are buying quantity one and just need one, you can just get one. But they're not sold in predefined quantity packages. So for people that have been with Moxa a while, in the past, we had multi-pack licenses with already built-in discounts. We kind of moved away from that because we found that everybody's environment was totally different. So going to a quantity one allowed us to be able to put together a package for you for exactly what you needed. So Jose, if that's something you're interested in, definitely contact your Moxa partner or Moxa account manager, and we'd be happy to help quote you and understand what the cost structure for that looks like. One thing to mention, since people are asking about this, I would say that currently the MX security license is sold as an annual license. Every year you'd have to upgrade. With the next version, which is going to come out at the end of the year, we are moving that to a perpetual license and grandfathering everybody in. So it'll be a one-time license, just like MX View 1. So thanks for the question, Jose.
Awesome. Then we have another question here from Federico. Could you share a list of recommended SIEM providers that best integrate with MX products?
So that's a really good question, Federico. I don't have an answer for you off the top of my head because some of that's dependent on what format of syslog the SCM company uses, and that's just not my area of expertise. So what I will do is I will follow up with you offline. If you've got some specific SIEM providers that you're interested in, that might be the easiest way for me to tell you, can we support it or not? Otherwise, I can come back with, you know, what we've tested with or what we've seen used in the field. But it might actually be easier if you could, you know, shoot us an email or put it in the chat or in the questions around, you know, if there's a specific provider that you're interested in knowing whether we have compatibility now or plan for in the future. I do know that there's a bunch of future updates planned for additional syslog formats that we're going to support so that the number of SOC and SIEM providers that we can support goes up. But outside of that, I don't have any other specific information. Another good question.
Awesome. We have another one. Chris here. What's the best way to handle proof of concept testing with the hardware MX or /MXV1 MX security opportunity?
That is a great question. I wish I could can this and send it directly to management, because this is something I've been asking about. I mean, Chris, as a partner, you know, having worked with Moxa a long time, you know, we're a product company, so our POCs in the past historically been a product or two. So we could send it out to you, you could test it. All the stuff that I just went over today is not something for the faint of heart that you just kind of do on a whim, right? It's expensive, it's time consuming. So there's a bunch of ideas that we have kind of that we're bantering around that. I'd love it if you or anybody else on the call, you know, had some ideas about that, because frankly, this is something that we struggle with because each customer is different. You have some customers that are kind of like from Missouri and, you know, prove it to me kind of thing, show me state. Others are okay with us just kind of doing more of a virtual demo, you know, over, you know, a cloud type of network, and you've got others in between. So I don't have like an answer that's going to fit every single opportunity. So that's something that, again, we'll take a note and follow up with you separately on. And like I said, if there's anybody else on here that's interested in, you know, seeing a POC or getting one started, we'd love to hear from you, and we'll figure out for your particular situation how we'll do it.
Awesome, thanks. We do have a few more questions here. We'll try to wrap them up pretty quickly. So we have, I understand the need for more advanced security, but I'm not sure where I should start. Any advice there, Marty?
So this is a question I think I get every single time we do anything that has security in the title. And what makes this a really hard question to answer is there's a lot of good information around frameworks, whether it's 62443, NERC, NIST, whatever. But the problem is none of them tell you for your particular network, what do I do? And for a lot of people, that's really what it comes down to. I've got this network, I need to protect this. I get that there are these best practices in this framework, but what it comes down to, I think, and this is just my opinion, is that, you know, this security is a really big topic, and there's just not enough expertise out there that's available to provide the consultative answer that folks are looking for. So I know a lot of you probably can't afford to hire your own dedicated cybersecurity specialist. Otherwise, you would, and you wouldn't be asking this question. So the best advice I could give you is to find a partner that focuses in whatever area that you as a customer is focused on, whether it's vertical, practice, whatever, and utilize them because they're going to have some of these experts. They're going to have some of the expertise that's going to be very specific to your environment and your vertical. And that's really the knowledge that it takes to be able to answer effectively, what do I do? Otherwise, we point you at this standard or this framework that's like 500 pages. You read the whole thing, and at the end, you go, I'm still not really sure what I need to do. So that's the best way I can answer that one. So thanks for that.
Perfect. Yeah. Another question here. Can you explain how virtual patching is different from IDS IPS?
Sure. I think there's also another question that Federico had as a follow-up that I want to make sure we get to, Andrew. But as far as the virtual patching, so it's a signature file just like the IDS IPS, and that's why it works over the network. For us, the differentiator is since we're partnered with Trend Micro, and they have, like I said earlier, a rich heritage in desktop antivirus protection. They have all of the signature files for all of those different Windows types of attacks. And we're able to take advantage of that and use that network deep packet inspection scanning and can look specifically for some of those Windows and Linux attacks and be able to, basically block them on the network, which again, a lot of folks, I think that's a pretty cool function.
Yeah, and another question here, is there updated documentation related to MX's syslog implementation? Is it standard for all of your products?
Okay, so the first question we'll take first. Okay, so is there documentation? Yes, there is. I'm not sure if it's online, Federico. So if it's not, just hit me or us up. We do have, because you also asked the soccer scene question, and I'm imagining the reason why you're asking for the documentation is in order for you to integrate, you need to know the syntax form of our syslog in order to integrate it. So we do have that documentation as far as what MX security generates so that you can integrate that into your soccer scene. Okay, is it standard for all of our products? Okay, so this is kind of a maybe yes or no question. So if I want the answer to be yes, I would say that all of the new next generation firewalls that are running MX NOS or MX ROS will have the same format and structure because it's the same software. If you were to compare the NatBox, the EDR 810, the EDR 902, 903, and the EDR G9010, they're all going to be slightly different. And that's one of the reasons why we went to that new consolidated operating system for that consistency, right? So that you're not having to guess what's the syntax based on the router I'm using for Moxa. So that was a really good question. So if we were giving away awards for Rico, you get the award for most and best questions for this session.
Awesome. Yeah, that'd be a great one to end it on. I know we're kind of coming up right at the top of the hour here. So yeah, just wanted to say thank you again, everyone, for joining. Thank you to Marty, of course, and Felipe for the rest of the series. Once this Zoom session ends, there will be a quick 2-question survey that you can participate in if you want to give some of your feedback there. But yeah, as always, if you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out, and we hope you have a good one. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.